Is it time to read a book? Is it time for sleep? Let's read a book, Echo. Let's read a book. Are you ready for your book? It's time to rest. The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. A strange disappearance. Good heavens, man, gasped Philby. What has happened to you? Standing in the doorway to his dining room, bruised and disheveled, the young scientist wore the look of one who had just been through unspeakable horror. He just stood there, silently, shaking his head. The other men seated around the table echoed Philby's amazement at the appearance of their host, a respected young scientist. As all the guests stared, frozen in their chairs, Philby's mind raced back to the strange events of the week before. That evening, as the scientist's dinner guests were all sitting around the table after one of his regular Thursday dinner parties at his stately home in Richmond, England, the host had captured everyone's attention with a point he was making. To avoid using the scientists' names, he let just be known as the Time Traveler. Among the invited guests were George Philby, a mathematics professor, and the Time Traveler's closest friend, John Manning, a psychologist, and Oswald Perry, a doctor. The men had been discussing the educational system in England when the Time Traveler burst out. And another thing, they're not teaching geometry correctly in today's schools. What are you talking about? Asked Philby. We do an excellent job of teaching math. I figured that system of math produced fine results with all of us, observed Manning, as he waved his arm to include all the educated men present. The Time Traveler raised his hand excitedly. No, you must let me explain. Go ahead. Tell us what's wrong with the way we learned and are teaching the subject, said Philby, briskly running his fingers through his wiry red hair. Okay, said the Time Traveler. First of all, they taught us that a line can be measured only one way, by how long it is, right? And he drew a straight line across his napkin. A line has one dimension, its length. You're right so far, said Dr. Perry. Now, I draw a square, continued the Time Traveler, adding 3 more lines to turn his diagram into a square. Now, how many dimensions does it have? 2, of course, said Manning. Everybody knows that, said Philby impatiently. A flat object has both length and width. Get on with it, man. All in good time, the Time Traveler's eyes twinkled, as if at some secret joke. Now, he continued, holding up his cube-shaped cigar humidor. How about this cube? How many dimensions does it have? Are you putting us on? Cried Perry. It has 3, of course, length, width, and thickness. Do I go to the head of the class? Perry's blue eyes gleamed behind his glasses. I'm quite serious, said the Time Traveler. Length, width, and depth, and that's all they ever teach it in school. His hand slammed on the table in anger. "Hold on now," said Manning. "Are you trying to tell us that there's more? That there's another dimension besides length, width, and depth?" "There certainly is. Look at this composite portrait of myself, for starters. 3 sections, right? First, I'm 5. He pointed at one section. "Next, you see me at 12. And finally, I'm 20 years old. How many dimensions do you see?" "The same 3, of course," said Philby. "The canvas and frame have length, width, and depth." "Aha," said the time traveler, "and that's where you're wrong." "Wait a minute," said Manning. "I think I know what you're getting at. Are you talking about time?" "Exactly," shouted the time traveler. "Time, the one factor they always manage to skip in teaching us geometry. Time is the 4th dimension." "But don't you see?" said Perry. "The reason they leave it out is quite obvious. Length, width, and depth are dimensions in space. We can move back and forth and up and down in space, but we can't go backward or forward in time." "Wrong, wrong, wrong," cried the time traveler. "The fact is, we can." "What do you mean?" asked Philby, getting up. "I am now walking across the room to this door and back. I can go up and down on a staircase or in a balloon. I can move in space, but I can't move into yesterday or tomorrow. None of us can." "That," said the time traveler quietly, "is only your opinion. I have been working on experiments for years, and I can now tell you of my great discovery. It is a time machine that is capable of taking us into the past or into the future." Everyone at the table laughed. "Impossible, ridiculous, absurd." "Don't laugh, my friends," said the time traveler. "It is important. It is not impossible or ridiculous or absurd. I can move in space, but..." "Really? Then how about showing us what you've done?" said Manning. "Yes, let's see your experiment," said Philby. Though I fear it's all a bunch of nonsense, the time traveler smiled at his guests and walked out of the room. They heard his footsteps heading down the long passage to his laboratory. Perry looked at the other men. "I wonder what it is he's getting," he asked, puzzled. "Probably some magician's trick," said Manning. Philby said nothing, but waiting with growling curiosity. Soon his host returned, holding in his hand something that glittered. It was a metallic framework hardly bigger than a small clock, and very delicately made, with some ivory and some transparent crystalline parts. The time traveler moved in a small 8-sided table over to the fireplace and pulled the mechanism on it. A shaded lamp, standing on the table, threw a bright light on the model. The time traveler looked first at his guests, then at the object. "I would like to explain," he began, "that this is only a model of my time travel machine. Notice this twinkling part above this bar. And these 2 levers? It's beautifully made," said Philby. "It took me about 2 years to complete," said the time traveler. Then, pointing to a kind of saddle, he explained, This is where the time traveler sits. And these, and he pointed to 2 small bars, these 2 little white levers control the time. The first one sends the machine gliding into the future, and this other reverses the motion. All the men got up and gathered around the table for a closer look. "When do we plan to test it out?" asked Perry. "In a few seconds, but first, I want you all to examine everything carefully. Check the table too. I don't want to waste this model and then have you tell me I'm a quack. For once the machine leaves, it will vanish into the future and disappear." "Are you really going to set it off?" asked Manning. "Yes, I am. No better yet, you are. Lend me your hand, Manning. This way, you can't say it's a fake." The time traveler directed the psychologist to put out his forefinger and push the lever. Everyone in that room saw the lever move, and everyone was absolutely certain there was no trickery. Suddenly, a puff of wind from the model made the lamp flame jump. The little machine quickly swung around, blurred and resembled a faint ghost of itself. Then it vanished completely, except for the lamp. The table was bare.